Close your eyes for a moment. Can you hear the rustle of straw, the clatter of rusted tin, the distant, frantic barking of a little dog named Toto? Can you feel the gritty dust of Kansas giving way to the smooth, sun-warmed promise of a road paved in gold? For generations, The Wizard of Oz hasn't been just a movie. It's been the cultural touchstone for wonder, danger, and the yearning for home. We all think we know the story. We picture the Technicolor brilliance, the Munchkins, the melting witch, and those ruby slippers that sparkle their way into cinematic legend. But what if I told you the path to Emerald City is far more winding, far darker, and indefinitely more complex than a simple childhood fairy tale? Well, tonight here on the Emerald City Chronicles, we're peeling back the green curtain. We're going beyond the sing-alongs and simple morale lessons to examine the enduring, often unsettling power of L. Frank Baum's creation and its inedible mark on Hollywood, literature, and the very concept of the American dream. Get comfortable because the tornadoes are just beginning. I'm Midnite Megan, and this is our deep dive down the yellow brick road. All right, let's ditch that perfect yellow brick road fantasy for just a second and dive into the messy reality of 1938 Hollywood, because even though The Wizard of Oz gives us these adorable high-pitched munchkins singing their hearts out, the vibe behind the camera was definitely less lollipop guild and more chaotic rock and roll tour. When the studio brought in over 100 little people, many of who were new to travel and suddenly thrown into a massive, restrictive studio environment, these things were bound to get wild. And believe me, they did. The stories about the Munchkins are legendary, and not in the best way. Margaret Hamilton, who played the Wicked Witch of the West, actually admitted that filming their scenes was the most disorderly thing she'd ever experienced. But the wildest part? Dorothy herself, Judy Garland, reportedly referred to them as little drunks. She detailed how the excessive drinking and general rowdy antics offset were a constant headache for the entire production crew and studio at MGM. It's just how crazy the cinematic magic is from the actual human drama. The Munchkins gave us the unforgettable, iconic movie moment, but the cast and the crew, their time on the set was essentially a beautiful, chaotic little mutiny. It's the perfect dark little footnote to all that colorful Technicolor optimism, but the chaos wasn't just limited to the extracurriculars of the ensemble cast. The physical production of Oz was frankly terrifyingly dangerous. Forget the CGI and the safety harnesses. This was the 1930s after all. Filmmaking and the actors were expected to do almost everything themselves. No stunt doubles. They were the stunt double. Take, for instance, the intense, highly inflammable makeup used on the principal actors, particularly on Buddy Epson, the original Tin Man, whose aluminum dust makeup led to a severe allergic reaction that put him in the hospital, forcing him to be replaced by Jack Haley. But we will talk about the actors in just a minute. Then there were the conditions on the sound stages to achieve that vibrant, iconic Technicolor look. The sets required banks of intensely bright Klieg lights. These lights generated a staggering amount of heat, often pushing the studio to a temperature well over 100 degrees Fahrenheit. Imagine just wearing a heavy costume made of wool, straw, or metal plating under those conditions. Dehydration and fainting were constant threats. The actors weren't just performing, they were enduring a grueling, hot, and hazardous physical challenge, all to give us that perfect cinematic vision. The magic we see on screen came at a very real, very physical cost. Now let's turn our attention to the poor soul who almost gave his life for that metallic sheen, the original Tin Man. So before Jack Haley donned the funnel hat, that role actually belonged to Broadway star Buddy Ebsen. The studio was determined to make the Tin Man look authentically silver, and their solution was as brilliant as it was disastrous as it was silly. They decided to coat Ebsen head to toe in a makeup of pure aluminum powder. It was only 9 days into filming when Ebsen began to experience severe shortness of breath and crippling cramps. The aluminum dust, a fine metallic powder, was literally covering his lungs. He suffered a massive allergic reaction, which landed him in the hospital for 2 grueling weeks. He was struggling. And just how did MGM, the mighty studio, react to this near fatal catastrophe? With a shocking indifference. They didn't bat an eye. Instead of halting production or offering substantial care, they swiftly just recasted the role with Jack Haley and switched the makeup from loose aluminum powder to a less volatile aluminum paste. Unfortunately, the parole just didn't end there. The new paste was still harsh, leading Haley to suffer several severe eye infections, one in which he had to have surgery on. Yet the show and the ruthless pursuit of that cinematic perfection had to go on. In the final telling detail of the production's harsh reality, the Tin Man costumes itself was a torture device. The metal suit was so stiff and restrictive that it severely limited Haley's movement, leaving him constantly bruised. Even the famous crying scene was fraught with difficulty. When oil wasn't visible on camera, the crew reportedly resorted to pouring chocolate syrup on his face, and he had eye infections and eye surgery. Does it sound like they really care? For the actors involved in the journey to Oz was a less of a dream and more of a waking nightmare of physical endurance and studio callousness. Now, from the metallic misery of the Tin Man, let's pivot to the shaggy, fearful heart of the cowardly lion, portrayed brilliantly by Brett Lahr. His costume is perhaps the most shocking example of the production's disregard for actor safety and comfort. Forget the synthetic furs or the light padding. Lahr's iconic lion suit was literally made from lion pelt, weighing at a colossal 90 pounds. Imagine wearing a 90-pound fur coat in a soundstage already blazing past 100 degrees Fahrenheit under those harsh Klieg lights. The heat was unbearable, leading to constant perfusive sweating and severe dehydration for Lahr, who was essentially trapped in a mobile sauna. Can you imagine wearing that suit on that stage? Whew, buddy, I wouldn't be doing that. The physical toll was immense, and the logistics of managing this costume were a nightmare for the crew because of the sheer weight and saturation from sweat. The crew had to resort to desperate measures just to get the suit ready for the next day's shoot. Every evening, they would place the heavy, damp costume into an industrial dryer. Even with this extreme measure, the thick hide and fur wouldn't fully dry. And what do you get when you combine damp, heavy animal hide? relentless heat, and daily human sweat, a costume that began to stink horribly and, even worse, developed mold. Bert Lahr was not just acting, he was performing an incredible feat of endurance inside a massive, putrefying 90-pound lion suit. The physical sacrifice required to bring that beloved character to life is a testament to the brutal, uncompromising reality behind the illusion of Oz. Our journey down this dark road continues with the character who famously longed for a brain, the Scarecrow, played by the incredibly talented Ray Bolger. Ironically, the man who was supposed to be empty-headed faced one of the most physically damaging roles of the entire production. His suffering wasn't from the heat or crushing weight, but from a constant punishing chemical bond to achieve that wonderfully wrinkled, sewn together burlap look. Bolger's face was covered in flexible fitted latex mask. This wasn't a mask that he could just simply slip on and off, not like a regular mask that was put together. It was meticulously glued to his face, and an antagonizing fixture that he had to wear up to 18 hours a day during filming. Imagine the relief at the end of a long day of shooting. Now, imagine that relief was immediately followed by an hour of sheer discomfort, because removing that latex mask was atrocious, and it was an hour-long process of peeling and scraping. The glue left a lasting, terrible legacy. Though some of the irritation did disappear and faded, the pressure and the stress of the mask left permanent marks, preferably around like the mouth, like right here, and then on the chin. Scars that were reportedly visible even 50 years later until the day that he died. So he died with those marks on his face from the Scarecrow. But the danger didn't stop at his skin. Like the Tin Man, the Cowardly Lion, the Scarecrow's costume was a hazard in itself. His straw-stuffed outfit wasn't actually straw-stuffed. It was packed with highly toxic, fireproof material, as we know as asbestos. This decision was purely made for the safety to ensure that the suit that's constantly near massive studio lights and open flames wouldn't catch fire. The tragic, dark irony is that the fireproofing material is a known carcinogen, one that has been defiantly linked to mesothelioma, a deadly form of cancer. And speaking of asbestos, there is one final horrifying detail about the production's disregard for health. When Dorothy, the Scarecrow, and the Tin Man are saved from the wicked witch's spell after falling asleep in the poppy field, they are awakened by a gentle snowfall. That beautiful cinematic snow was in reality pure shredded asbestos. From the makeup to the costumes to the weather itself, the magic of Oz was literally woven with toxic peril. The next incident, and perhaps the most horrifying case in the study of brutality of the Oz production, belongs to the incomparable Margaret Hamilton, the woman who immortalized evil as the Wicked Witch of the West. If the other actors endured torment, Hamilton faced a near-death experience, a harrowing ordeal brought on by the very magic intended for the screen. Her transformation into the Green Menace was torturous daily ritual. Because of the makeup's poisonous nature, Hamilton was strictly forbidden from eating while wearing it, meaning she went up to 18 hours a day without food during filming. The cinematic moment of her suffering came when the scene where the Wicked Witch vanishes into a puff of red smoke and fire. The stunt required her to rapidly descend through a trap door. Now, given her costume, she had a long, sweeping coat. Hamilton was understandably nervous. We would all be nervous trying to do that stunt, and practiced the maneuver repeatedly. The director insisted she only needed to perform this take once. This proved to be a brutal lie. After one perfect take, the director demanded for a second for insurance purposes. Following a lunch break that left the crew tired and complacent, they attempted the second take during the third final attempt, which looked perfect on camera. Hamilton realized too late that her hat and broom had caught fire. She looked at her hand and watched it in horror as her skin began peeling back from the wrist down. She was far from safe. With an open wound, the toxic copper-laden makeup began to seep directly into her flesh. The rush to save her was immediate. The head of the makeup crew quickly doused her in alcohol used instead of the acetone that they usually use because they thought it would be a good antiseptic, and frantically scrubbed her body until it was raw, stripping that caustic paint from her wounds. Hamilton later described the pain as excruciating, taking her breath away. Wrapped like a mummy, she was rushed to the hospital and stayed for 6 grueling weeks. Her recovery was cut short, though, when the director called demanding that she returned to work. So imagine the callousness, being badly burned and recovering, only to be ordered back to that hazardous set. Now, upon her return, the director's lack of sympathy, because we all know they're going to be sympathetic over all this, was breathtaking. After examining her healing face, he determined to remove the glove covering her injured hand. When she did, the exposed nerves were visible. He then took her hand and squeezed it until she cried out in pain. So he squeezed her nerves, and this is going to be painful, that's her nerves. Despite the shocking display of cruelty, Hamilton chose not to sue the studio, fearing that a lawsuit could and probably would blacklist her and end her career in Hollywood. So Hollywood is a scary thing, especially when it comes to lawsuits. When they next called her back to the shoot, a broomstick stunt, she refused to do it herself, asking for reassurance about her flame-resistant costume. Instead of being truthful, they told her that the stunt simply wouldn't involve fire, but putting a pipe on the back of her broom. Having learned her lesson about trusting the studio, she no longer trusted them. She insisted on a stunt double, Betty Danko. Tragically, Hamilton's fears were realized when she received a call informing her that the stunt had gone wrong. Now, we've uncovered the physical price paid by supporting cast, but the cruelest irony of The Wizard of Oz is that its heart, the girl who sang of rainbows and longed for home, endured the most profound and lasting tragedy of all. We're talking, of course, about Judy Garland. Judy was 16 when she was cast as Dorothy, a role originally intended for the much younger, more established Shirley Temple. The difference in age became a catalyst for a campaign of systematic abuse and control designed to manufacture a childlike innocence that Hollywood so much demanded. I wonder why. To visually de-age the developing 16-year-old, the studio ruthlessly disguised her adolescence. She was forced to wear a makeshift corset, a binding garment she later described as feeling like iron, to compress her figure and hide her natural curves. This physical constraint was paired with an even more damaging regimen a brutal studio-imposed diet, and it consisted almost solely of black coffee, chicken soup, and chocolate, upwards to 80 cigarettes. Can you imagine a 16-year-old smoking 80 cigarettes? And this was all to suppress her appetite while filming. The environment around her was so corrosive, some crew members reportedly referred to her as a fat pig with pigtails, a psychological assault that contributed to her lifelong body image issues. Poor girl. To keep up with the grueling schedule, she was routinely given amphetamines to sustain her energy throughout the day and barbiturates, which are sleeping pills, at night. The studio-sanctioned cycle of drugs created the foundation for the crippling substance abuse that would haunt her for the rest of her life, ultimately contributing to her early tragic death. The indignities did not stop there. Her co-stars were fearful that relatively unknown little old Garland would cause the film to flop. Since she wasn't Shirley Temple, they were said to have been openly cruel to her. There were even rumors that during the famous We're Off to See the Wizard dance sequel, they were intentionally trying to sabotage her by attempting to make her fall, attempting to make her mess up and blame it on her. But it didn't work. The set itself was a toxic environment of physical and emotional control. During one incident, the director, Victor Fleming, actually took the girl and slapped the teenager across the face during a take, simply because she was laughing with Brett Lahr, the Cowardly Lion, and they were filming. And in a final disgusting betrayal of her childhood after filming wrapped up, get this, the head MGM, a man who was supposed to be a founding pillar of Hollywood, reportedly began to constantly grope and harass Judy Garland. How disgusting. Judy Garland's performance as Dorothy is etched in a cinematic history as a beacon of purity and hope. But, for the young woman behind the gingham dress at Yellow Brick Road was a nightmare paved with cruel chemical dependency and abuse, a perfect heartbreaking metaphor for the dark side of Hollywood. Her journey to the Emerald City was not a fantasy. It was a soul-crushing ordeal that marked her body and mind forever. So where does all this leave us? We began this journey looking for the cinematic magic of a beloved fairy tale, but we ended up finding a crucible of chaos, injury, chemical dependency, and profound emotional abuse. The Wizard of Oz is an undeniable masterpiece, a film that changed the course of cinema and gave us images and songs that are embedded in the global consciousness. But the green curtains we peeled back tonight didn't just reveal a few production secrets. It reviewed the cold, ruthless mechanism of the golden age of Hollywood. Now, the Technicolor dream we cherished was purchased with the suffering of its star, the permanent scars of Ray Bolger, the near-fatal poisoning of Buddy Epson, the torturous burns on Margaret Hamilton, and the systematic soul-destroying dependency forced upon 16-year-old Judy Garland. Perhaps the true lesson of Oz isn't that there's no place like home, but that the journey to reach that idealized home or any dream is often fraught with unseen peril and brutal sacrifices. The magic you see on screen is real, but so is the price paid for it. It forces us to ask ourselves, when we celebrate these cinematic legends, do we remember the human cost? And how many cherished American dreams, how many other cultural touchstones had a similar unsettling truth just beneath their glittering surface. Just think about it. Next time you hear a girl sing something about rainbows, the storm never is truly over. I'm Midnite Megan, watch your step, and I'll see you where the yellow brick fades to black. Remember to subscribe.